Hello and welcome to Perspectives on Consecrated Life. I'm Deacon Pedro. Today we continue celebrating consecrated life, and to help us out, I'm very excited. I'm sitting here today with Father Richard Holung of the Missionaries of the Poor, all the way from Jamaica.
Right, Pedro.
It's good to have you back, Father.
Thank you.
When you were growing up in Jamaica, did you ever think you were going to be a priest?
Not at all.
What were you thinking?
Because, well, I was Buddhist. My parents brought me up that way. And then I met the wonderful Franciscan sisters from Allegheny, New York.
Okay.
They came down, they talked about Christ so avidly and so much like people in love, very intensely committed to Christ. And they kept talking about this man. And the more we heard about it, although we were Buddhists, my sisters and myself, it lacked a center, because Buddhism is basically about enlightenment,
Right.
From the depths of yourself. But in this person of Christ, we saw this wonderful, tender, beautiful, magnificent God, who is Christ. And we were fascinated by the stories.
So as a Chinese person in Jamaica, Buddhism, it was the common faith? Is that
for Chinese.
For Chinese in
Yes,
Jamaica?
definitely so.
And you met the sisters because that's the school you went to?
At the Alvernia Prep
In
Kingston.
That was a high school, or?
That's a little prep school.
A little prep
Right,
school. So
yes.
how old were you more or less when you met the sisters?
I must have been 6.
Oh, you were, okay. So you
Yes.
got to meet them quite
Right.
young. And did you do your full schooling at that school? At a
We
Catholic school?
went right to pre-high school,
Yeah.
and then after that I went to the Jesuits.
Okay, so tell me about that. So how did you go from being Buddhist to learning about Jesus Christ and meeting the sisters to something must have happened there that you decided to join the Jesuits?
Well, at the prep school,
Yes.
the sisters kept insisting on this person of Christ. And I remember being told, look, you've got to, how can you come to our school and not love Jesus and want to be committed to him? So we were baptized, my sister and myself,
Okay.
before I went to high school.
Okay.
And then the Jesuits were very warm and welcome, much more like people from another world, you know, with different values. They had no concern for anything personal or worldly. And I was very drawn to that.
Right.
I think they might have identified that I was quiet and very, very, very concerned about matters of the spirit. By nature, I was that way, I guess, from my Buddhism.
Yes.
And so they opened the doors, even though we were very, very poor children, and we could hardly pay for the school fees.
Right.
They saw in my sister and myself something prayerful, and they wanted to draw us to Christ.
Right.
And for that reason, I went to the Jesuit school.
Okay.
It was a good school, and indeed there were men that were just wonderful men in the Jesuit high school.
Yeah. When you were baptized, was that a personal choice, or were your parents also supportive of your coming into the church?
They were supportive.
Yes.
They saw in the sisters something that was extraordinarily tender-hearted again. There were women who were interpersonal with the students and told of values that were very, very much like Chinese values: family life, simplicity, love of nature, respect for everyone, and so forth.
Right.
We're drawn to that.
Yeah. So you went to the Jesuit high school.
Yes.
How old were you when you went there?
I was 12.
And you finished your high school there.
Yes.
Quite. How old were you when you graduated?
17.
And is that at that point did you decide to continue your studies with the Jesuits, or?
I felt drawn to the Lord. I remember there was this wonderful man who came to Jamaica, Cardinal Cushing from Boston. And his grandfatherliness and his sense of humor were so attractive that I felt as though I wanted to serve God.
Right.
And then the Jesuits lived community life in a very beautiful way. They supported each other.
Yes.
There were men dressed in habits. I loved that. They were very brotherly and kind and so forth. So that even though we could hardly pay for the school fees, They just let it by, and
Right.
I continued. And by the time I finished high school, I wanted nothing else but to serve the Lord.
Really? And to serve the Lord with the Jesuits?
With the
'Cause
Jesuits.
those might not necessarily be the same thing.
Right.
You never went through a period of doubt or insecurity or
No.
or
No,
interesting.
through my
That's
through my
amazing.
high school,
Yeah.
I was very, very clear about it.
Uh-huh.
There was one day when a statue was brought to the football field at St. George's College.
Yeah.
And I remember all the kids were out on this field, and we were following the statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and we said the rosary together, and we went out in the streets, and we came back, and I saw brilliant light in the sky, as though the Lord was shining down upon us and showering abundant graces. And I said, you know, there's nothing else I want in the world but to serve the Lord.
Amazing.
And it clinched it when I was, I might have been 14 years
Wow.
at that time.
Wow. So then you finished high school, and then did you join the Jesuits immediately after?
I worked for 2 years.
Okay.
I worked at the airlines.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then you joined the Jesuits.
Yes. Yes.
And how long were you with the Jesuits before Missionaries of the Poor?
From 17 to 41.
Oh, okay, so a long time.
24 years.
A full career.
Yes.
A
Yes.
full career.
Yes.
So, and as a Jesuit, were you in Jamaica?
Yes.
Okay.
I studied in Boston because Jamaica is a mission
Okay.
of Boston.
Yes.
And so I did my novitiate there, philosophy,
Yes.
and then also my theologate. But I had 2 years of regency, which is your teaching period in Jamaica.
All right.
And it clinched things for me.
Mm-hmm.
It was very, very, very clear to me there's nothing else I wanted but the Lord. But at that time, there began to be some upheaval even within the Jesuits.
Yes.
You could see changes taking place, like derobing,
Right.
lack of commitment to community, secularism, individualism. I had a very beautiful studies program and an excellent early formation in the Jesuits. But there was erosion beginning to happen.
Right. This was around the 70s, early 70s?
Yes.
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 So at the same time that you were noticing these changes, or that these changes were happening, you were also noticing that there was a poor church that needed tending to.
Yes. First of all, it was really the loss of identity that was happening within the Jesuits.
Okay.
And then I began to become more and more committed to the Word of God. And in the Word of God, I found the person of Christ. He actually visibly came out at me. So it was no longer an intellectual exercise
Right.
to have gone to teach at Boston College, to go to graduate school and to get degrees. That seemed irrelevant at that particular time.
Right.
And then I began to notice people on the streets who were very, very poor and forgotten, and then correlated with what you saw in the Word of God. And then suddenly I began to say, but teaching about poverty and teaching about justice is a whole lot different from living the life of poverty and serving out in reality
Yes.
justice reasons that Christ put forward in the Beatitudes.
Let me ask you about that, because Pope Francis talks very similar to what you're saying in terms of his experience around the same time, 1970s. Yes. Can we not be a church that helps the poor without actually being with the poor?
No.
Why not?
It can't be, because then you end up being the donors or the masters. No, I'm not, certainly I'm not against charity.
Yes.
But we as a church should be a church of the poor. You see, there is, I think there's a struggle within the church. And I had to make the distinction myself. Are you going to be a part of the Church of Christ? or are you going to be part of the church of the world? And I said, I can't, although I had all that the Jesuits had to offer.
Right.
I had to be authentically as a Christian,
Yes.
and much more so as a priest. I had to be Christ, you know, and the identity between Christ and a priest, as well as Christ and any Christian,
Yes.
has got to be you are like him. And the extent of your love and your service depends very much on how far you want to travel with him, and how deeply and how completely. And I had no option.
Yes.
Either or.
Yes.
I realized there's no half measures.
Uh-huh.
Either I was going to be poor with the poor, committed to the poor, and living out the Word of God. Either that, or I was going to talk about it.
Yes.
Which is pure compromise.
Yes.
You know.
Okay, we're going to take a little break. We're speaking with Father Richard Holung of the Missionaries of the Poor from Jamaica. He's going to tell us more about what the Missionaries of the Poor are when we come back from this short break. So stay tuned.
I will serve you, my sweet Jesus, my beloved Lord, who leadeth me. I will serve you, my sweet Jesus, my sweet Jesus, to the end.
Welcome back to Perspectives on Consecrated Life. I'm Deacon Pedro. We're speaking with Father Richard Holung of the Missionaries of the Poor. So you were noticing that the church needs to be with the poor. That was the beginning of what I guess became the Brothers of the Poor. Tell me about how that happened.
Brothers of the Poor was initiated, I think, by the hand of God in some very strange way. There is a home that is run by the government, which had some 550 homeless people.
Wow.
And when I left off teaching at the university in Jamaica, I decided, let's do it. You know, you live once, you either become a holy man or you don't. And so I gave up everything. And we started working, Father Hayden, Father Brian, and myself, in this place where 155 women died. They were burned to death in a condemned building. And it was very disturbing to myself because there was I going off to the university and so forth, and was not free to respond to that situation. And then I said, okay, let's leave that job behind. We have nothing but these people. If Christ were alive, the first place he would go is to where these charred bodies were. So we went there and we saw, you know, all these folks dead. But then we visited the other dormitories and we found a lot of old people still living, and they were living like on bed springs. There was no mattress. Some people had found that they weren't being attended. They were not wiped and cleaned after 1 week of messing and urinating and so forth. And that God wouldn't want this. So we began to do this kind of work, just going and ministering then. And then after the building was built, I started really advocating help for this home. I was confronted by the government, and I was told that I was a traitor because Jamaica is about tourism. But I was advocating the poor and the need to attend to the poor, so that we were in sort of a boxing ring together.
Yes.
I told them, you do your job, I must do my job. I must work with the poor because I'm doing God's work. Continue to do your tourism promotion and so forth. And I was commanded by ministers of government then, you either stop taking pictures and producing them, passing them on to the media, or we would arrest you.
Really?
And that you would be considered someone who is totally against your country. That was said publicly in the presence of a lot of media people.
Yes.
And I said, do what you have to do. I will continue to do what I'm doing. And then they asked me, well, how many of these books and pictures have you produced and sent around? I said, I'm trying to get this home together so that people can live in a human way.
So you were trying to get financial support so you could help these people, which is why you were bringing attention.
The whole public began to realize what was happening, because this confrontation with the government happened in the presence of a lot of media people.
Right.
And the media people took their path of justice.
Interesting.
And for about 3-4 months, there were calls on the radio. It was a huge, huge outcry from the people themselves.
Yeah.
And then finally, I think God broke through, and the Prime Minister eventually said, okay, the people have spoken. We must rehouse people. We've got to get up a proper building. Right. And then the government asked me to be part of that committee. Yeah. And so justice was done.
So at that point you had officially left the Jesuits. What kind of support were you getting from the church?
I was in transition at that time, and there were just these few brothers with me.
Right.
But the way the Lord had it, all that was really orchestrated by the Lord himself. And the buildings were put up and so forth. I was on the board and so forth. I just saw that this had to be done. And then it made it very, very clear what the charism of MOP had to be, which is to work with the poorest and the most forgotten people who were not being backed up by people. Yeah. But what they really needed was an advocate, you know, and I realized oddly that was myself, you know. And so the missionaries of the poor now take care of the homeless and the destitute.
Right. And now you are not just in Kingston in Jamaica, but you're in many, many other countries.
Kenya, Uganda, Haiti, India, Philippines, Indonesia.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's the work you're doing everywhere?
Everywhere. On the free service of our free service to the poor.
And also now there's a community for women.
Yes. Yes, they work with women who are considering abortion.
Okay.
Right, and the women come in, and the women might decide to keep the babies after they're born. The women live with us, with our sisters.
Okay.
And then the babies are born in a home there, which is called Holy Innocents. And when they're born, the mothers could leave the children with their sisters, or the mothers might leave them for a while and then come back and take them. And we're open to that. The sisters have gone that route.
So you went from being 4 brothers, brothers of the poor, to being missionaries of the poor and being recognized as missionaries of the poor. And now, more than 30 years later, you've received pontifical status?
Recognition,
is that what it's called? Recognition.
Right.
Tell me about that.
There are now 550 brothers and priests. And then we began the sisters just 3 years ago.
Yes.
We have 25 sisters. And it's growing. And it really was wonderful when we received that pontifical status.
Yes.
It was done in the time of Pope Francis, who is also Jesuit.
Yes.
Tremendous boost for us, because now we understand that the church at the highest level has said, go forth, spread the spirituality of service with the poor all over the world. Let it be, because you're no longer just yourselves, but you now belong to the church. Yes. You know? So go on, spread it everywhere, anywhere. So we're opening a home in East Timor in August.
Right.
Brother Gusto announced that, our new general.
Yes.
And so we're going to be there. We were requested to be there because there's a community of lepers who have no one to take care of them. And the bishop there asked if we could take that on.
Okay. Now you mentioned Brother Augusto. He's the new Superior General, which means that you've retired as
so
Superior General.
So to speak. Yeah. Maybe not. But I still try not to obtrude. But as founder, you see, you have the whole vision in your mind, and I'm still alive, and I'm fairly strong. So
yes.
So I try to do as much as I can to assist.
Now, Father, the first time I heard about the Missionaries of the Poor, had nothing to do with the poor. It had to do with the music and the shows.
Yes.
Tell me how that began and how that fits into the ministry to the poor.
The music, I can't play any instruments, I can't read music.
Okay.
But I found that over the years, just so much music has happened inside my mind. And even sometimes when I was driving a little Morris Minor, songs would come in my mind and I had to stop because I was becoming so distracted.
Right.
And then a lot of times at night I simply cannot sleep because all this music was happening inside of me. And unless I got the music out, I couldn't sleep. So I said, okay, I'll be obedient. And so I began recording them on a little tape recorder. And then I had other people listening to the music. And then the little kids who were not so interested in Mass began to hear this music that was very Jamaican.
Yeah.
Whether it be reggae or it would be mento or revival type of music.
Yeah.
And they just lighted up at church. So I said, all right, maybe that's a sign. And so I wrote. And then after doing songs for worship, we advanced to doing concerts. And again, those were really very successful. And then from there, I began to write larger themes because my background is in literature.
Okay.
So I began to write larger themes. I began to construct stories out of Isaiah the prophet,
Isaiah and Jesus
Moses,
2000,
Jesus 2000,
Messiah now,
Messiah.
Which is the latest one.
David, King David. Yeah,
so these are big theatrical productions.
Right. 50,000 come every time we put it on in Jamaica.
And do you have a group of actors, singers, or are these some of the people that you work with, that you do ministry with, that participate? Do you do it for fundraising mainly? What is?
We do it really for proclamation of the gospel.
Yeah.
If that doesn't succeed, any amount of money is nothing to me. It has got to generate the person of Christ and a spirituality that I think we Christians need to see and understand the incredible power of a King David or Isaiah or Jesus or Moses.
Yes.
They need to see the reality of it, which is my first intention as a writer. Bring people to Christ and first seek ye the kingdom, and other things will follow.
Else will fall into place.
Right, yeah, people give once they see what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
It's been 44 years of doing music.
That's amazing.
And they're all volunteers, the singers and so forth. But incredible talent have come our way. The best of talent you could imagine. Famous people who are singers in reggae and so forth and known commercially.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I have one last question because we've been talking about your life, your vocation. You're a missionary, you're a musician, you're doing all these great work because you're religious.
Yes.
So what does it mean to you to be consecrated, to be living the consecrated life, and in the context of what we're celebrating this year, the year for consecrated life?
To be consecrated life means I'm married to God, and that's it. That's final, and I'm glad He's committed to me, and I'm glad to be committed to the Lord, and I want nothing else. It is, as you think of the consecration of bread and wine, that's how deeply I consider it, you know. This is now the body and blood of Christ, and the consecrated life to me means that I am Christ. I must live like Him, and be like Him, and be faithful to Him. And all I want to do is to be united with Him in thought and word and deed, everything that I do.
Good, and I think you're doing that, and it's a good example for us who should be doing the same. Father Richard Holong, thank you so much for speaking with us today and for the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Pedro.
And for the good music. Father Richard Holong is the founder and former superior of the Missionaries of the Poor, the congregation that started in Jamaica. You can learn more about the work of the Missionaries of the Poor and also support them financially. Go to their website, missionariesofthepoor.org. That's all for tonight. Thank you for being with us, and may God continue to bless you and your home. Thank you.
Our Father who art in heaven,